Have you ever struggled to choose which skills to use for your character? Have you ever wondered how much critical hit damage you could deal? Well, it turns out that if you combine the Witch Blood Mage Ascendancy with pure critical hit damage scaling, you can use almost any spell you want. That way, you get awesome damage and can choose between a wide range of skills, the best of both worlds. Oh, you can also ignore enemies' elemental resistances, because why not? With this build, you can use any spell that is capable of getting a critical hit, maximize its crit chance, and have a 1000+% critical damage bonus, formerly known as critical multiplier. That allows you to easily switch the skill that you're using with minimal skill-specific setup necessary. Most of this critical scaling will come from the passive tree, but getting some crit chance and crit damage from our gear will help, especially if you want to reach 1000% crit damage, which is an arbitrary and unnecessarily large number. You also want your skills to have high base damage to maximize the value from your big damage multipliers. To increase your base damage, you will focus on increasing the level of your skills. Anything in addition to that, like spell damage, element-specific damage, or cast speed, is a nice bonus. You'll also want some mana recovery on kill to help sustain your skills. Defensively, you'll be a hybrid energy shield life character. For your Ascendancy, you will be taking the Witch Blood Mage Ascendancy, which requires you to start with the Sanguimancy notable. This makes your skills have a life cost in addition to your mana cost, which draws straight from your life pool without touching your energy shield. Fortunately, you cannot directly kill yourself with this life cost. Instead, if you do not have enough life to use a skill, the game will prevent you from activating that skill, much like what happens when you run out of mana. This can cause you to run low on life, which can be concerning, but this Ascendancy point also gives you a way to increase your life. When you take Sanguimancy, you also automatically get the Life Remnants skill, which is a persistent buff to our character that gives you red spheres that restore your life when you crit and or kill enemies. When you pick up red spheres, you can actually exceed your maximum life, up to twice what it would usually be. This helps counteract the downside of Sanguimancy and can actually make you tankier. Just bear in mind that if you leave an area when you have more than your base life, you will drop back down to your usual maximum life when you re-enter. Next, you will take Gore Spike, which gives you more critical damage based on how much life you have. This is one of the reasons why, instead of focusing just on energy shield, you want to scale life as well. That way, you improve both offensively and defensively. Importantly, this damage bonus is based on your current life, not your maximum life. So, if you are on low life, Gore Spike will give little to no additional damage, but if Sanguimancy helped you get twice your usual life, then you're getting twice the value from Gore Spike. At endgame, we'll have around 2,000 base life, or up to around 4,000 with Sanguimancy, which means Gore Spike will give you around 50 to 100% crit damage, as long as you haven't taken too much damage yourself. Notably, the damage from Gore Spike does not appear on skill gems anywhere, meaning that you will almost always have more crit damage than the game shows you. Next, you have Sunder in Flesh. This sets the base crit chance of all spells to 15%, which is the same as the highest base crit chance spells, Unearth, Bone Cage, and Bone Storm. Technically, that means that if those were the only skills that you were planning to use, then you do not need this point. However, by taking Sunder in Flesh, you can make any skill that is capable of critting get those critical hits far more consistently. That means that if you want the flexibility to switch to almost any skill, this is the most important Ascendancy point in the build. For example, it more than doubles the critical hit chance of most fire spells. For your last Ascendancy point, you have a few options. I recommend Grasping Wounds, which spreads out some of the damage that you take over 4 seconds, making you less likely to die from big hits. If you want to go all in on offense, you can use Blood Barbs to get more added physical damage and some bleed setup. If you're having trouble sustaining life, you could use Vitality Siphon instead, though if Sanguimancy is causing life sustain issues, it's usually because you need more damage or hittable targets when you use a skill, not because of a lack of leech. Our passive tree is very simple. Get all the critical chance and damage that you can. By scaling our damage almost entirely through crit, you do not have to worry about respeccing the passive tree when you change skills, because that crit damage is going to work for just about anything. There are so many of these critical hit clusters on the tree that is where most of our damage scaling comes from, which also makes you less reliant on gear. Some of your critical hit chance and multiplier comes specifically when enemies are on full life and or not affected by any elemental ailments. Though these boosts technically are not active all the time, they are so powerful that they help you one-shot most of the enemies that you encounter. Functionally, that means that most enemies you see will have full health, giving you all the bonuses, and you do not need to worry about losing those bonuses because once you hit the enemies, they are dead. Factoring in these conditional critical stats, you can max out your crit chance on any skill that can crit. If you get some critical stats on your gear, you can even potentially save a few points by skipping a couple of crit chance nodes. However, if you are concerned about still critting enemies that survived getting hit, you can keep all of these crit chance points allocated. You will need a lot of intelligence from your travel nodes to equip high-level skill gems, but you can sneak in a few strength nodes as well to boost your life. I took about a cluster and a half of energy shield nodes to get up to around 3000 energy shield, and around 5000 effective life. You'll need to reach about level 90 to do this. After that, you can use additional levels to get cast speed, or a cluster specifically suited for the types of skills that you like best. For jewels, we'll want crit chance and crit damage, with spell damage as a bonus. Thus far, we've mostly been talking about using critical hits as the foundation of the build, but the skill gems are what you get to construct the build however you want. As a reminder, our Ascendancy only increases a skill's base crit chance if that skill is capable of dealing a critical hit. This is important because there are some skills that just cannot crit no matter what, such as Incinerate, Profane Ritual, and Flame Wall. Basically, if you do not see a critical hit chance listed on the skill gem, then the skill probably cannot deal a crit. In some cases, those skills may still help you indirectly, but you shouldn't use them as your primary damage dealers because they won't benefit from your biggest source of damage scaling. Also, if possible, we want to avoid poking enemies with little bits of damage, at least until we hit them with a big skill that can crit. Additionally, there are some subtle implications for how you approach your skill gems because there may be some support gems that you want to use on multiple skills. However, because you are only allowed to use one copy of a support gem at a time, setting up your skill gems can be tricky unless you settle on using one or two skills, or you are willing to swap support gems in town. On the other hand, if you want to switch quickly from skill to skill in combat, you may need to make some compromises on your support gems. Also, the more skills you use, the more expensive it will be to maximize the quality, level, and sockets of those gems. Before you buy a bunch of perfect skill gems, I recommend testing lower level and or socket versions of a skill to see if you like them first. Here are some clear speed skill setups that you could use, with at least some attempt to avoid duplicative support gems, but you're going to notice a few pop up a lot. Spark with Arcane Tempo, Considered Casting, Persistence, Acceleration, and or Mobility. Arc with Chain, Unleash, Lightning Mastery, Arcane Tempo, Coursing Current or Elemental Focus. Fireball with Scattershot, Fork, Wild Shards, Arcane Surge, Arcane Tempo, and or Eternal Flame. Essence Drain with Extraction, Chaos Mastery, Swift Affliction, Intense Agony, Persistence, Pierce, Hinder, and or Arcane Tempo, combined with Contagion with Magnified Effect, and basically any other skill you can get to reduce your enemy's chaos resistance because this one was a little bit painful. For single target damage, I recommend trying Bone Storm with Heft, Physical Mastery, Hourglass, Lacerate, Arcane Tempo, and or Considered Casting. You could also use Flame Blast with Concentrated Effect, Fire Mastery, Arcane Tempo, Considered Casting, Hourglass, Extraction, and or Elemental Focus. As I was saying, you may have noticed some recurring skill gems. Ultimately, which skills you use and how you use them is up to your personal preference. And though there are support gem limitations, the addition of new support gems and new active skills that benefit from different support gems will make this less of an issue as time goes on. For spirit skills, you will use Grim Feast to make enemies drop white energy shield boosting wisps, which, like the red Sanguimancy orbs, allow you to exceed your usual maximum energy shield up to twice what it would usually be. Combined with Sanguimancy, that means you can potentially reach around 10,000 effective life. You will use Vitality, Clarity, and Cannibalism support gems to help sustain your life and mana. In some cases that we will discuss later, you will have enough spirit remaining to use a cast on Ignite, Shock, or Freeze gem, plus whatever skill you'd like to trigger, or alternatively, you can use Blink for extra mobility. For your chestplate, gloves, boots, and helmet, you will use rare gear with energy shield and life in the prefix slots, and resistances in the suffix slots. Remember that because you have Gore Spike, you benefit both offensively and defensively from scaling life. It's possible to get crit chance as a suffix on your helmet, and crit damage as a suffix on your gloves. Doing so makes it easier to max out your crit chance and reach arbitrarily large crit damage numbers, but are not strictly necessary and do make it harder to squeeze resistances into the remaining suffix slots. Your belt and runes are good places to load up on those resistances. Currently, the only way to scale crit with the ring slot is with the unique Lazuli ring Seed of Cataclysm. Wearing 2 of these increases both your crit chance and crit damage, which you can increase further by adding caster quality on those rings with sibilant catalysts. You can keep all of this gear the same regardless of which skills you use. The remaining gear can differ depending mostly on what type of damage your selected skills deal. For your weapon, you will want to get a wand that increases the level of whatever element skill you are using. That means it is easier to get the right gear if your skills are all the same element. However, if you are using different elements on your skills, you can also swap to your other weapon set to a wand that increases the level of the other element that you are using. These level boosting stats go up to +5 for element-specific spell skills, but only +4 for universal spell skills. So you will be stronger if you pick a specific element on your wand or swap to a different wand that matches the other element. However, you can swap to a wand with +4 to all spell gems as a simpler alternative. For additional stats, you want spell damage and or damage added as a different element in the prefix slots, and the suffix slots should be the spell level boost plus either cast speed, crit damage, crit chance, or mana gained on kill. That last stat being especially useful for your clear speed skills. You can also get a lot of offense from your shield. Getting a +2 to all spell gems is a priority. Fortunately, this is not element specific. You can also get cast speed, crit chance, crit damage, generic spell damage, element specific damage, and of course, energy shield. Just remember that if you are switching to a different wand when you change skills, you will also change your shield, so you may want 2 shields, especially if one or both of them have element-specific damage rolls. Then there's your amulet, for which you have 2 options. If you are using elemental spells, you will want to use the unique solar amulet Beacon of Asis, because it makes your critical hits ignore enemies' elemental resistances, which is incredibly powerful, especially given how often you get critical hits. It also gives you enough spirit to use Blink or cast on Shock, Ignite, or Freeze. If you are using physical or chaos spells, you will want to use a rare amulet with +2 level of spell gems and whatever critical chance or damage you can get. You can also use distilled guilt, despair, and envy to instill additional crit damage with barbaric strength, or use distilled ire, envy, and suffering to instill lots of cast speed with spiral into mania. For charms, I prefer the stone charm to help avoid stun. With all of that set up, you can have a build with over 1000% crit damage, max crit chance, ignore enemy resistances, and use almost any spell you want. With a new patch just around the corner, we should keep an eye out for changes to the Blood Mage Ascendancy, particularly Sunder and Flesh, any changes to the critical hit clusters, and any improvements or reductions in pathing efficiency on the skill tree. We are also expecting lots of new skills to be released and many balance changes to existing skills. Fortunately, this build should be very well positioned to adapt to those changes. There are already some additional unique pieces of gear that you can use to approach this build in a different way, and new uniques introduced could add to that list. New ways to increase base spell damage without relying on increasing our skill levels would give us other options as well. All that is to say, while this build might not live for long in its current state, it should still provide a solid foundation that we can continue to mold to our preferences even after significant changes. If you are interested, I can update the build after the new patch to experiment with those changes. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.